Good evening, everybody. It is Steve with Real Progressives. And before we get started, I want to issue an apology to my partner, Mr. Joe Firestone, for last night. We had lots and lots and lots of baby drama going on here at the house. Mr. Butters was not at his best. And on a serious note, he was quite a sick little boy. But it also happened right in the middle of a broadcast, which makes all this stuff a little bit more difficult. So, Joe, I just want to thank you for your professionalism and carrying on the broadcast without your sidekick. Now, I want to also raise a couple other things real quickly before I bring Ellis on. The first thing that I think is really important to note is that I have been on a personal mission to remind everybody that while all these little things are happening here and there and there and here, we have real honest to God policy things that we need to be elevating now before it gets to a point where the next wave of congressional candidates come in and the next elections come in. If you're not already out there educating people and talking about the federal job guarantee and pushing the truth about federal deficits and debt and modern monetary theory and sovereignty of our currency, then as the GOP pushes for their balanced budget amendments and other stuff, we are going to be way behind the curve, and you can pretty much guarantee a major failure if we don't choose to make it a priority to educate our movement. All right, without further ado, let me bring on my partner, Ellis. Sir Ellis, welcome to the show, sir.
How you doing?
I'm doing, sir. I'm doing. All right, so this is part, yeah, you suck. The keyword is you suck.
You suck. Yeah.
Stewie says you suck. All right, so outside of massive suckage, explain to me, sir. We're going on to do MMT 102 this time around, or 201, depending on your perspective.
101 part 2.
101 part 2, even better. So let's go ahead. Where did we leave off? Do you recall, sir? If you don't, move right
about
in.
2 weeks ago, I think we stopped at, right after we did the sectoral balances, we stopped at why the national debt is silly, and it doesn't exist. Because, you've got all those foreign companies that they sell stuff to the U.S. and then they earn U.S. dollars and then they buy treasury bonds and stick them in savings accounts. So it was a perfect lead off. Tonight, though, we want to start off by clarifying the difference between exports and imports, and how they affect a nation's standard of living. Then we'll talk a little bit about central banking operations. So we'll be able to debunk a bunch of central banking myths by just simply explaining certain operations with how they operate, for instance, with treasury bonds. Do they control the money supply? Do they control the price of money? How they defend the target interest rate, what monetary policy is, that kind of thing. And probably finish up then with the private debt thing. Yeah? Because private debt's that gives me an opportunity to use my little Pepsi analogy about water and Pepsi. For those people that are confused with why private debt's such a bad thing. and that would pretty much give, with that first part, and then this right here, it gives you a basic overview of the MMT viewpoint. It's not everything, but it's a fundamental viewpoint. And from there, you have a foundation you can build on. And you can understand macroeconomic reality.
Very good.
Without sucking.
Yeah, I was going to say, Ellis, we have some really, really good students flying through our midst. In particular, a lady named Dawn, who has really been out there trying to present this in any forum anybody will give her 5 seconds to go through. So the stuff you're planning on going through tonight, I hope Dawn's watching. This will be a huge help to her. And for those people she summoned into the midst of the fray, this will be good fodder for them as well. All right, sir.
Okay. Well, I don't have to stand up for this. So about the exports imports thing. We went over what in the sectoral balances last time. It was 2 weeks ago. We talked about export, or when a nation imports more than it exports, how dollars are then leaving the domestic private sector and entering foreign hands because American consumers are purchasing imports. And so this reduces the number of available dollars for consumers in the US to spend. So the government has to deficit spend to sort of fill that tank back up. Well, we didn't get to talk too much about the difference between exports and imports. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, I know what exports are. Oh, I know what imports are. You don't have to explain the difference to me. Actually, I do. Because there's a fundamental confusion that goes on when it comes to exports and imports. You know, people, they'll say, oh, I understand the issue, and then they scream, buy American. We need to export more. Or you might have seen me on Twitter just recently jump on the vice president because he was complaining about the trade deficit with South Korea. You know, the trade deficit had doubled. Okay, well, anyway, so I had to jump on that because that was like, you know, low-hanging fruit. I understand, but, you know, I was hungry. So I had to go for it. Easy target, might as well take it. But anyway, exports. Everyone knows that where an export is where, we'll use America as an example. The United States makes a bunch of products, and they make cars, and they make trucks, and they make hammers, and they make drills and squeegees. And they say, let's sell them to other nations, okay? And everybody's like, yeah, USA, USA. And the more we can export, the more USA, USA. The only unfortunate thing about that is what we're actually doing is we're taking our production, we're taking our resources, that is the raw materials, okay? Real resources, taking the raw materials, you're taking our labor, okay, all our time, and all this and all the factories, and we're putting all of our energy into manufacturing these hammers and cars and trucks and squeegees. And instead of keeping them ourselves and using them, we're giving them away to other nations to enjoy. See? Okay, so that's an export. All right, now an import is the exact opposite. Here's Germany. See them over there? There they are, right there. So, also, diese Deutsche here, diese Deutsche Volken, they create these BMWs and these Porsches and all these other things, yeah? And they say, let's use our labor, put these all together, build this is wonderful. Now let's sell them to the United States, okay? So instead of keeping the BMWs and keeping the Porsches and keeping the German knives and, you know, the German steel and all the other things they make, they decide to just sell it off to the US and get US dollars in exchange. So in essence, what happens is they forego the use of their production. They give it to us. We get to enjoy it. Our standard of living rises, okay? And all they get, as Warren Mosley would say, is a paper bank statement. Ooh, okay. So they don't get anything. You get a short end of the stick on that. All right. So when we're talking about exports and imports, we understand that exports are actually real costs to the nation, because instead of making our own stuff and then consuming it ourselves, we're giving it away for nothing. You know, so there it goes. All right. And when we import stuff, guess what happens there? Well, our standard of living increases, right? Because we're not producing. See, we're not using our labor and our resources to make these goods. They just send them to us. And this increases the marketplace. We've got all sorts of wide variety of goods and services to choose from. Our standard of living increases. Okay, and all the foreign nations get, the foreign companies get, is a paper bank statement denominated in US dollars. Wow. You know, and most of the time, most often, those dollars just sit at the Federal Reserve. Okay, they buy bonds and they put them in a savings account, and there they sit. They take the earned dollars, you see, and they stick them in a savings account. That's the thing we call the national debt. We talked about that 2 weeks ago. You know, the financial Armageddon that draweth nigh. Yeah. But Anyway, so we can understand that imports they increase our standard of living. So the upshot of it all is Mike Pence got on Twitter and he said that the most concerning is the trade deficit with South Korea has doubled since courts. In other words, he's really worried about this trade deficit. So, in other words, what Mike Pence was telling everybody on Twitter was the Americans, our standard of living is too high and it needs to be decreased. That's what he was saying. So when he's screaming and yelling about the trade deficit doubling, he's basically saying that Americans really need to reduce their standard of living significantly. Okay, so that shows you how dumb that statement is. And if you still don't understand, basically what he's mad about is that people have Samsung Galaxies and they have Elantras, like Hyundai Elantras and stuff. And the standard of living has increased substantially because of that. And they paid for them with US dollars, not South Korean money. You know, they paid for it with US dollars. And those dollars are sitting in a savings account at the Federal Reserve. And he's really upset about that. So Mike Pence would like us all to slow down our purchase. In fact, we need to just reduce our standard. Get rid of your Samsung. Get rid of your Hyundai. We don't need it. We got to reduce the standard of living to the point where we're cavemen. And then let's just export everything. Yes, that's it. We'll export. We'll do 100% exports and we'll do no imports. We'll just export everything and then we'll all die because we won't have nothing. Everybody else will have it. We'll use all the resources to export everything and then the nation will collapse. That's brilliant. At least there's no trade deficit. So anyway, that shows you how dumb that is. And that sort of finishes off the sectoral balances and national debt where we left off. In case you don't want to review that, the national debt is nothing but a bunch of savings accounts at the Federal Reserve, where foreign companies sell goods to the U.S., they earn U.S. dollars, and they really can't do much with them except stick them in savings accounts. They buy bonds. Or they can let it sit in a reserve account, or they could exchange them for at their expense, mind you, for another currency and go do business elsewhere, or buy something in the U.S. But beyond that, they just stick them in savings accounts.
Well, let me ask you a question real quick regarding that. So now they've got this money parked at the Federal Reserve, et cetera, and obviously we have the fetishizers, but then we have the Forex fetishizers that are like, well, what happens if the U.S. dollar no longer is the world reserve currency, and on and on and on and on and on. And just for our people who are stuck there.
That's the IMF's nonsense, okay? The International Monetary Fund has a basket of currencies, all right? That's the IMF. Has a basket of currencies, says, well, here's the dollar, and over here you have the euro, and you have this other one, and this one, and that one. And so you hear this argument, well, the U.S. dollar is not the only currency in the world. Well, no shit. I mean, there's the British pound, okay? There's the pound sterling, there's the Canadian dollars, the Australian dollars, Japanese yen. Duh. How about the euro? Got that too. But no, it's not the only currency in the world. We're competing with other currencies. No, we're not. No, we're not. Here's why the United States is not competing with euros. Here's why the United States is not competing with Japanese yen. Because no one in the United States uses Japanese yen or euros. We use US dollars here in the US. And that's the only nation that's important when it comes to the US dollar. Okay? So if tomorrow Germany and the European Union decided, well, there's nothing to do with US dollars anymore. Okay, these other basket of currencies, not the reserve currency, let's push the US out. No more dollars in the reserve currency. This does not affect in any way, has no effect in any way on the US government's ability to manufacture dollars when Congress wants to, and then spend them into existence to address domestic unemployment and other domestic economic issues. It does not stop it at all. So, inflation. These are all scare tactics. You'll notice that every single, from the petrodollar to the reserve currency to the Fed, because it's a private banking conspiracy, to the Rothschilds, to inflation, to everything imaginable, is all directed at the government's ability to deficit spend. You see, they're all threats. If you defeat one argument, they've got another one and another one and another one and another one, and they've had 40 years to make this shit up, to scare people away from deficit spending for full employment, the public purpose. They've even attacked full employment. Obviously, for the last 40 years, they've attacked full employment, but full employment itself, you can't have full employment because inflation. Because inflation, printing money, you're monetizing the debt, you're monetizing printing money, oh, the reserve currency, oh, petrodollar, everything. And it's these same people. It's these same people that look at Japan, and for the last, I don't know, 20 years or so, they've been saying that Japan's going to sink into the sea any day now. Any day now. Any day now. Any day now. And has it? It's not going to either. Okay, so, yeah.
The most recent one, just so you know, and I'm thinking that this would be something fun to, like, going forward, maybe spend 5 or 10 minutes to just slap a bad article down once a week or something like that, because these guys get hit with these dumb things. But there's this latest one, and that is, and this is all in the same vein. Oh my God, China and Russia are working on a new gold-backed currency that's trying to push the U.S. dollar out yet again.
Okay. Go ahead. That's fine and all, but you see, the thing is that in the U.S. we don't and will not be using this particular currency. We use U.S. dollars here, and guess what? In Canada, they use Canadian dollars. And again, in Australia, they use Australian dollars. Stephen Hale, right? And in Japan, shout out to my friend Yuki in Japan. In Japan, they use the yen. Okay, they don't use this particular currency. And then, second of all, what we're talking about is these people are worried about oil. Okay, so they're creating new currencies. They can trade oil, or maybe they're going to shift to the euro and get rid of the petrodollar. It's hard to get rid of the petrodollar because all a petrodollar really is, like I've said 1,000 times, it's just a it's a transaction mechanism. It's just oil producing nations and oil companies just say, well, you know, you guys over in England, you use the pound, and people in Canada use the Canadian dollar. Everybody needs oil, and you've got all these currencies. How about we just transact in this just one currency? And they say, okay, let's do the US dollar. Say, okay. And it just happens that if you're a government, you have an account at the Federal Reserve and it gets credited in dollars. And if you're a private company, your commercial bank account gets credited in US dollars. That's it. That's a petrodollar. You know, I said this 1,000 times, say it again. And in the end, okay, they could choose to go to euros if they see fit. You know, what matters is the currency that the particular nation saves it, not the currency that the oil producers and oil companies transact their business, their personal business in. What matters is, yeah, for instance, you sell gasoline in the US. Well, that's the US dollar, so that's what matters. So that's what people save it. But in the United Kingdom, they use pound sterling, not US dollars. So that's the currency that matters there. You see, so these oil companies and these oil producing nations, they could agree to transact oil business in cans of tuna. It just doesn't matter. Then you'd have the can of tuna dollar, the tuna tin dollar, you know, or tuna tin, whatever the hell it is. Or, you know, like I said, you know, the banana producing nations, you'd have a banana dollar. Big fucking deal. I mean, what matters is the currency that's being saved in the nation in question. And in the case of most every nation, it's not US dollars. It's their own currency, or like in the case of the European Monetary Union, it's euros, not the dollar. So it doesn't matter. Here's a perfect example. If you and I, Steve, decided, let's say that I'm going to manufacture toothpicks and you're going to manufacture toothpicks. And what we're going to do is we're going to transact business together in the toothpick trade, okay? So what we want to do is you and I, you have a different company, I have a different company. We want to sell toothpicks to various nations, all right? You and I just sit down and say, I'll tell you what, we'll do our own personal business in US dollars. And then you take the toothpicks, I'll take the toothpicks, and we'll all go to separate nations and sell them to other nations, and they can use the toothpicks. But we're not going to be selling them in US dollars in a nation like Greece or a nation like Germany or the UK. We'll be selling them in euros in the EMU, and in Great Britain we'll be selling them in pounds. So that's the currency that matters, not the fact that oil nations say and producers say, oh well, dollar. That doesn't. Oh, and they go to war over that. No. I mean, it's all conspiracy.
I really appreciate you addressing this, Ellis, because we will carve this up. Because these people, it's not just that they say really, really aberrantly dumb things. It's that they say them with authority and anger and nastiness and trolling. And it really turns out that it's like hiding it's like trying to compensate for something very, very small. Something very, very small. They're trying to hide something very, very small by making this big bravado thing going on. And in reality, it really is an awful, painful, repetitious exercise. And you can tell you can't stand even answering it anymore.
It's silly. It's silly. It's like someone asking me, about Planet of the Apes. Okay, and you think this is real, and the apes are coming. Well, I have to keep repeating.
When we were talking last night, Joe was very, very eloquent trying to find places of common ground with the myth tellers of AMI. And I'm far less generous in that respect because I believe that any lie, any myth needs to be crushed with absolute severity. I mean, like slaughter all myths, because a lie is a lie is a lie is a lie is a lie. And so when you've got all these things like the petrodollar and but what about the BRICS? The BRICS are going to get rid of the dollar and all this other stuff. I want to meet their ignorant anger with righteous anger and crush it, just slaughter it, show them what 6'270" feels like upside their noodle. And I just, at some point in time, it just gets tiresome to listen to it.
Well, you have to realize that the reason why people are doing it. You were talking about they want to hide something that's really small. The thing that they're trying to hide that's very small is the fact is the very small thing is. I'm trying to say this in a way it's not offensive, but it's just going to come out offensive. So there's nothing I can do about it. I have to be blunt. The thing they're trying to hide is the lack of knowledge. Okay. Either the truth is very boring and it doesn't have enough drama, or two, they think it's too hard to understand. It takes too long to educate yourself on what's really happening. So it's much easier to make up stories, or it's much easier to grasp some conspiracy theory because it's a ready-made thing. And then this fills the gap in their knowledge base. See, they have this gap in their knowledge base. That gap there is the very difficult thing. The either undramatic truth and reality that's very boring, or you could call it that thing that they think is too hard for them to understand. So they just fill that knowledge gap with junk. Petrodollar, Rothschild conspiracy, private banking. If you'd read the Federal Reserve Act, how do you know about the Federal? Well, if you read Creature from Jekyll Island, and they just keep filling that knowledge gap up. Yeah. They fill that knowledge gap up there, and that knowledge gap, is an actual lack of knowledge of what's really going on. And they can't put the pieces together, so they've got to take a hammer and they've got to actually take this circular object into a square hole and finish the little puzzle. And then, they can't get it out, and they don't want to because it's embarrassing. So they just tell you, well, this is the way it's supposed to look. but that's the problem there. Pure and simple. It's a lack of ability. And in reality, the petrodollar is not that hard to understand. It's very simple. Central banking operations, the fundamentals of central banking operations, very, very, very simple to understand. But they think it's so complex. And that's because the mainstream has poisoned their minds. Literally, the mainstream economists have poisoned people's minds with such nonsense in these textbooks and stuff, these ridiculous textbooks, that people don't believe they ever could fathom central banking operations. So they're just like, I'll just take your word for it. And then they add that to their little knowledge gap, sprinkle it in there. Next thing you know, you have all this beautiful knowledge, and then stops right here, and then there's a steaming cesspool, of bullshit that stinks, and then,
like shitcoin, right?
Yeah.
Like shitcoin.
Look out for the Bitcoin. It's coming. We're all going to die.
The LL libertarians love it.
You'll notice, though, that's a common theme amongst these petrodollar people, amongst the Rothschilds people, amongst the Fed is private people, is we're all going to die. You know, you notice that there's a terrible trauma coming. We're all going to die. We're in trouble.
The solutionless movement. It is absolutely. It should no longer be called revolutionary. It should be called the solutionless movement, because these people are literally handicapping, crushing, kneecapping anybody with a brain, trying to move the ball forward to try and save our kids' lives, make the planet inhabitable, make our lives just a little bit better. They're here to tell you it can't be better. Life has to suck. There's got to be some conspiracy, and so I don't want to hear truth. Just let me go break some windows or something. Let me do something irrational.
Nothing can be done. That's the neat thing, is that the entities that are against us are too powerful. Okay, they're unstoppable. They control everything. They're aliens. They've come, and the mothership is going around the earth, and they've landed, and we're all doomed, and we can't do anything. You know, that's the whole story.
It's a very, very dismal existence. One that I cannot give. I can not only not make room in my heart for, but I can't even give them pity long enough to give them a sympathetic shoulder to cry on, because it literally, I've gotten to the point now where it just literally derails everything. So anyway, keep going, buddy.
Yeah. So so like the next thing, like after the exports imports, I wanted to finish that off. We got the central banking operations. Okay, and I'm going to cover these operations in a very fundamental way, so that everybody can grasp them. And at the same time, it'll demonstrate why the Federal Reserve or your central bank like the BOE, or the RBA is not an independent thing. This central bank independence thing is a myth. All right. It's MMT has a different view, and it's based in reality. And it's that the Treasury and central bank are actually consolidated. Okay. And I'll explain that in a little bit when we start going through central bank operations. But first, before I have to stand up, which I don't look forward to standing up sometimes. Depends on my back. But anyway, what we need to understand about the central bank. Central bank in the US is the Federal Reserve. In England, it's the BOE, it's the Bank of England. RBA in Australia. Bank of Japan. All right. These are the nation's central banks. They're not owned by the Rothschilds. Okay. You want to do your Rothschilds thing real quick, or should I continue?
Rothschild!
Okay. And so they're not owned by the Rothschilds, and they're not exactly private banks where, a bunch of commercial banks have ownership and they've taken control of their respective governments and we're all going to die type of thing. As much as you want to believe that, it's not true. The central banks are not exactly independent at all, is a myth of the mainstream. Central banks cooperate with the Treasury to conduct both fiscal and monetary policy, and we'll see that in just a moment. But first, to understand central banking operations, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to talk just a moment about the difference between a thing called vertical transactions. Is we good here with the board, Steve? Does it look all right?
Yep,
okay, great.
fine.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between vertical transactions and a thing called horizontal transactions, because when we talk about banks themselves, these banks conduct what we call horizontal transactions. Okay, vertical transactions take place between the government sector and the non-government sector. Okay, so when Treasury spends, okay, it's injecting when it deficit spends, we'll say, it's injecting dollars and leaving them there. In the non-government sector, it's creating and leaving net financial assets in the non-government sector. So net financial assets are increasing, okay, in number. So the private sector, we'll say, just for familiarity, the private sector's accumulating net financial assets when the government's deficit spending. Okay, so when the government is spending into the domestic private sector. We'll just put this square here and we'll call this the domestic private sector. DPS, I like that. And up here's Treasury, okay? When Treasury is spending, it's actually manufacturing dollars and spending them into existence. So all federal spending is dollar creation if we're in the US, okay? or in Australia or Canada, it's dollar creation, okay? And what's happening is when it deficit spends, the number of dollars available in the domestic private sector, are increasing because it's leaving them. That's why we call them a net financial asset. You can save these things. You can save a US dollar. So when Treasury deficit spends, when it deficit spends into the private sector is able to save these. Okay, so it's a net financial asset. All right. So another vertical transaction is also when government taxes. And I should make it a point to let everybody know that the federal government is spending and taxing on a daily basis. It's not like this only happens once a year. It's doing it every single day. Okay, so to understand it clearly, what we'll do is we'll leave Treasury up there. Okay, we'll put Treasury up here. Okay, and over here we'll have the Fed. Remember that last 2 weeks ago we had a big rectangle. We called it the Fed. So there's the Fed. Okay, and these boxes are reserve accounts. Okay, they're held at the Fed, and commercial banks have reserve accounts at the Fed. So here's Chase and here's Bank of America. I believe those were the two examples we used last week. So here's Chase, here's Bank of America, and they have dollars in these reserves. What they are actually high-powered money. It's what we call the central bank liabilities. If you will, central bank money is sitting here in these reserve accounts. Okay, when the Treasury deficit spends, it's crediting individual bank accounts. Okay, and the reserves, you see here, are being added when it deficit spends. So as it spends, it goes into the reserve account, and these reserve accounts fill up. Okay, if it's deficit spending, the overall level of the reserves are rising system-wide. Okay, it's very important to understand this. These are vertical transactions. Okay, the taxation, like I said, taxation is the removal of dollars from reserve accounts by the Treasury. You see that? So the dollars vacate. Those are vertical transactions. Any transaction between the government and the non-government sector is a vertical transaction. The importance of these transactions is simple. This is how the government adds, it creates net financial assets, and it destroys net financial assets. In other words, in layman's terms, this is how the government creates dollars and how it destroys dollars. It does this through vertical transactions. So vertical transactions are the only types of transactions that can either increase or decrease the number of US dollars available for the domestic private sector and the foreign sector to use. Okay. Bank transactions alone are called horizontal transactions. Horizontal transactions do not result in increases in net financial assets. They cannot. It's just the shifting about of dollars that were created from fiscal policy. Okay, so if you look back, if we go back to those reserve accounts again, I'll just draw this rectangle real quick. Here's some dollars, and here's a dollar. Okay, here's one. Let's say this bank over here is shifted, through daily transactions, people are swiping debit cards. Reserves are shifting back and forth between bank accounts. Let's say here goes one over to here. Okay, as you can see, there's still $4. I could take it all away from this bank over here and put them all over here. There's still $4. I could take these three and take them out and put them over here at this bank's reserve account. You see, there's still $4. That's because banks themselves cannot destroy US dollars. They are horizontal transactions. Bank lending is a horizontal transaction. We'll get to that in a little bit too as well. Okay? So what's important here, now that we understand this, we need to ask ourselves a question. When I talked just a few moments ago about when the government is deficit spending, reserves in the system are rising overall. Okay, we need to understand what the problem is when reserves build up and build up and build up. Okay, and to do that, we need to know the difference between fiscal policy and monetary policy. Okay, Treasury, Congress, Treasury controls fiscal policy. Fiscal policy results in an increase or a decrease in dollars in the economy. Okay, not monetary policy necessarily. Monetary policy has everything to do with bank lending. Okay, all right. So the Fed conducts monetary policy. Treasury conducts fiscal policy. They're not the same. Okay, these two operations are completely different. But in order to conduct monetary policy, the Fed needs help. And in order to conduct fiscal policy, the Treasury needs help. Okay, so who's helping who? Well, that's why MMT, basically because of the flow of funds and everything, MMT views the Treasury and the central bank as a consolidated federal government, because in reality, it's the only way you can look at it. Okay, because they depend on one another to get things done. Okay? There's no independence with the central bank. Okay, so the first question before we get to the system-wide thing is we got to ask, because we've heard the Milton Friedman thing. Remember, we dealt with this, that stupid quantity theory of money equation that everybody harkened back to about inflation. Oh God, you know, M times V equals P times Q. You know, and the central bank controls the money supply. Oh my God, we're going to die. Okay, no, you're not going to die. And the reason why you're not going to die is, regardless of whether we're talking about the Fed or the Bank of England or the RBA, the central bank does not control the money supply. Here's why. Because in a modern monetary economy, the one that we're living in today, okay, it's based on demand. The money supply, see the quote, money supply, is based on demand for bank credit, okay? So the Federal Reserve or the central bank doesn't control this. It doesn't control this money supply, all right? So control of money supply doesn't exist with the central bank, all right? What does the central bank do? Well, it conducts monetary policy. So it sets the price of money. It sets the price of bank lending, you see, by setting a target interest rate. Fun? Yes, very fun. So what happens is this. Since we know the bank can't control the money supply, and here's why I should explain why. The reason why it can't is because it sets a target rate, okay? So to defend a target rate, we're getting ready to talk about that too. How it defends this target rate is very illuminating. We talked a little bit about it 2 weeks ago, but we'll get into it a little bit deeper today. In order to defend its target rate, sometimes it has to increase the number of reserves, and sometimes it has to drain off excess reserves to prevent the overnight rate from interfering with the target rate. All right? And if it doesn't interfere, if it doesn't intervene and deal with that, it'll lose control of monetary policy. So if it went out and it got a bunch of, let's say it bought a bunch of bonds and sucked up a bunch of bonds through open market operations, increasing the number of reserves to excess, and it had a positive target rate, what would end up happening is the overnight rate, these excess reserves competition, would force it down, would push downward on that target rate, and the central bank could do nothing but actually go in and remove all the excess reserves it just put in. Okay, this is also why, I really should explain what's going on first and then explain this. So I'm doing this backwards in a way. But this is why with quantitative easing, okay, and with quantitative easing, the central bank first sets the target rate out on near zero. And it does that for a reason we're about to talk about, because it's about to build excess reserves. All right, but let's go ahead and talk about the target rate. We're not going to say the federal funds rate or the federal funds market. The reason why we won't say this, we'll say the overnight rate and the interbank market, because we have international viewers as well. So, it's all the same thing. All right, so we'll just use that. Everybody won't be confused. the overnight rate, or excuse me, what happens is when Treasury is deficit spending, okay, we said that reserves are rising system-wide. Okay, so dollars in reserve accounts are rising because it's deficit spending. All right. Now, what's going to happen is we have to understand that the central bank is trying to conduct monetary policy. So it's set a target rate, and it has to defend that target rate. All right? That target interest rate, I should say. And so what happens is when excess reserves are present in the system, here's a funny little thing occurs. During a normal daily business, like I showed you, banks will be shifting dollars back and forth between reserve accounts because people are writing checks and buying things with debit cards. What's happening is, eventually, some banks will find themselves short of reserves, and other banks will find themselves with a surplus of reserves. Banks don't want to hold on to excess reserves because they don't lend them out. They don't want to hold on to them. All right? So they must be enticed to hold on to them, or they must be enticed in other ways, One of the things that these banks do when they have a surplus is they want to lend them to other banks who are deficient. And what these banks that are deficient will do is they will head to the interbank market. Okay? And they'll try and pick up those reserves because it's cheaper than going to the discount window, okay, at the central bank. So they'll go ahead and they'll pick up those excess reserves so that they are no longer deficient. Okay? So far, so good. All right. So if they're not deficient anymore, all is well. But the problem is that the competition for these excess reserves drives the overnight rate down. That's a big thing for the central bank, having that overnight rate drop down. As it's driving it down to what we call the corridor, to the bottom of the corridor, what happens is this interferes with the central bank's target interest rate that it's set. And if the central bank does not intervene to stop this competition, it will lose control over monetary policy. Okay. So, what do you think is one way that the central bank can defend that target interest rate? Treasury bonds, believe it or not. It picks up treasury bonds, okay, and then it uses them to drain off excess reserve to stop the competition. It simply goes into a reserve account. I saw someone said they're having a bit of trouble seeing the board, so I'm going to move just a bit closer. Hopefully this is enough, or I'll write bigger. I'll just have to write bigger, I suppose. We're having some trouble tonight. I don't know why. But anyway, here goes that big reserve. There's the big reserve account here. Okay? And here's the central bank, which we'll denote with CB. All right. Here are those excess dollars in reserve accounts. Now, to stop the competition, the central bank acquires treasury bonds, not because it wants to get the government at its knees and hold on to the, and make it pay interest payments to the central bank so the Rothschilds can go off skiing. All right? That's not what this is about. The central bank will acquire through open market operations, and it acquires treasury bonds. Well, once it has a few treasury bonds, when it's wanting to defend that target rate, what it does is it takes a few of those excess reserves away and replaces them with a treasury bond. This stops the competition. And so the central bank can defend has defended its target rate and kept everything the way it wants. So it has total control over that. The banks do not. Banks have no control over this whatsoever. All right? Okay. The only thing that the banks can do is try and offload excess reserves to one another on the interbank market, and that will influence the overnight rate. The Fed can, or the central bank, can defend that target rate and stop all this by just sticking a treasury bond in replace for those liquid reserves. So all it does is basically drain away this excess reserves. and it sits there with a bond. And the reason why it uses a bond is less liquid than a liquid reserve. Okay? But more importantly, a bond pays interest. You see that? So a treasury bond entices the bank to hold on to the bond. But at any rate, what it does is it deletes, and this is going to be important when we talk about interest on reserves. All it does is basically delete some of this excess liquidity, sticks some bonds in there, halts the competition, and is defending the target rate. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is Treasury is not issuing bonds because the federal government needs to finance its deficit spending. Treasury is not issuing bonds to conduct fiscal policy.
Can you say that one more time, Ellis? That's a really, really big one. Make sure everybody heard it loud and clear.
Sure. Treasury is not issuing bonds to finance the federal government's deficit. Okay? Treasury is issuing bonds to support a particular interest rate that the government wishes to see. Okay? Treasury is not issuing bonds to conduct fiscal policy. Treasury is issuing bonds, in fact, to help the central bank conduct monetary policy, because the central bank uses the bonds to drain off excess reserves to defend a target rate. Hence, the reason why national governments that have a sovereign currency issue treasury bonds is because they wish to see a particular interest rate prevail. And that's how you guarantee that it prevails, by using bonds to drain off liquidity in reserves, to drain off excess reserves and keep the target rate in line. It's real simple. The Federal Reserve of the central bank chooses a target rate. It picks one, 0.25%. Okay? Now it goes to defend it. Excess reserves in the system and the competition for those excess reserves can throw the overnight rate down towards the bottom of the corridor. So guess what? You use a bond, it's all over. That's it. And that's why central banks pick up bonds. That's what they need them for. They don't need them to fund the next yacht for the Rothschilds. They don't need them to fund Chase, the CEO of Chase, so he can go out and get on a yacht and buy another one. You know, that's not what they're for. That's not why the central bank buys these debt instruments, as they call it. It buys them to conduct monetary policy. And even the Fed itself says so in one of its facts. It says exactly why it buys bonds. Okay. So what's the problem with this? Well, what happens is these bonds equal national debt, because whenever, Treasury is issuing bonds, blah, 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 you got a national debt. Bonds are actually securities accounts which are held at the central bank. All right. We talked about this at the other part one. We talked about how bonds are actually just savings accounts that pay interest. Okay. What happens is, when we're dealing with bonds, issuing these stupid, archaic devices that really don't have any use in a modern monetary economy. I mean, like I said many times, it's like sticking one of those Model T Ford cranks on the front of a Ferrari. And it's just dumb. It has no real purpose except for this, to defend a target interest rate. All right? But what ends up happening is people buy bonds and, the central bank issues these bonds and stuff. You get these things called securities accounts. I'll just put in the SEC accounts. Securities accounts are savings accounts, and they're held at the Federal Reserve. And what happens is, I keep saying that. Gotta stop. What happens is, these are reserve accounts. These are reserve accounts. What happens is when a bond is purchased, the dollars are shifted to a securities account. So they're shifted over here. I'll just put this in red. That way everybody can see the difference. The dollar is shifted over into a securities account where it will sit earning interest. The securities account, like the reserve account, is nothing but a spreadsheet sitting at the Fed, on the Fed's books. That's all it is. It's not a giant vault filled with gold coins or paper money. It's just a spreadsheet. These are just numbers flying back and forth between spreadsheets. So here in the reserve account, a bond was purchased. It gets shifted over to a securities account. Now it's on this sheet. the spreadsheet, and it will sit there until maturity. Okay? Well, so the national debt starts building up in securities accounts. And then they say, oh, well, no, there's $20 trillion, we're all going to die. There's 20 trillion numbers sitting on a spreadsheet at the Federal Reserve, unspent, earning interest. That's all it is, the savings account. Okay? And so people are really upset about that. And so, like you and Joe were talking about last night, AMI wants to, it has a problem with the national debt. It doesn't like seeing that. Everybody's afraid of the national debt. So we want to stop the national debt. So the way to do that is to stop bond issuance. Okay, so a real simple procedure. We just got to stop bond issuance. But remember, since bonds are issued by Treasury not to conduct fiscal policy, but they are issued to conduct monetary policy, okay, you're going to need something to help the central bank defend its target interest rate if we're going to rely on monetary policy. Ugh. Why you want to do that? Why do we want to rely on monetary policy? I don't know. But if that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. So, because the Fed is setting this target interest rate, we're going to have to come up with a better idea. And here comes interest on reserves.
Well, Ellis, real quickly, before you go into that, what is the reason the Fed sets a target interest rate? Why are they defending an
monetary policy? Set the price of money. Set a price of bank lending. That's what the target interest rate is. The Fed is charged with monetary policy. That's what it conducts. That's what it has to do.
In other words, they control bank lending. They make the cost of us going into debt. They set the bar for us going into debt.
The Fed sets the price of bank lending. And then, banks might be above or below, or depending on, what they want to do. But they set the baseline price. Okay? And when they raise the interest rates, or when they lower interest rates into negative territory, it's stupid. That's a tax on banks. It doesn't really do anything. And when the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, you hear how CNBC was out there going, the Fed needs to raise rates. The Fed, they were going on for 6 months. Every financial news outlet in the United States, when will the Fed raise interest rates? Will it raise interest rates before November? Will it raise them before December? When will? The reason why these financial news outlets were doing that is because they were trying to pressure the Fed into actually raising interest rates. And it's not to stifle aggregate demand and cool off overheating economy. The reason why they were deadly interested in this is because Wall Street wanted an increase in its basic income guarantee. That's what raising the benchline interest rate is. When you raise the target interest rate, when the Fed raises the target interest rate, or the central bank, the Bank of England raises the target interest rate, what's happening is you're making bank lending even more profitable. See, so there's more guaranteed income coming. It's just greater income. Everything, bank lending, you got the interest rates paid by the government on securities, everything, and every rich person who has savings, they're all happy. They're making lots of money. But when you bring it down to zero, they're like, yeah. Okay. So, they want that interest, they want that baseline interest rate to go up because that increases Wall Street's basic income guarantee. See? Yeah, monetary policy. But anyway, so since we're relying on monetary policy like a bunch of idiots instead of fiscal policy, well, if we're not issuing bonds, we're going to have to do something else. That's where the interest on reserves come in. But even this is really a bad idea. It's really a bad idea. Let me show you why. Because now, instead of issuing a bond to drain off these excess reserves, remember, banks don't want to hold on to the excess reserves. All right? So in order to prevent banks from going to the interbank market and seeking these excess reserves, and the banks with surplus reserves trying to lend them over to other banks, which will interfere with that target rate, the central bank will have to entice banks to hold on to those excess reserves. And the way it does that, interest on reserves, is paying interest on reserves. So if the bank is earning interest on its reserves, on its excess reserves, it's going to hold on to them and not lend them to another bank who's deficient. See? So that prevents the competition from the get-go, before it even starts. So the target rate is once again defended. Here's the problem. Remember, we had securities accounts. I think my pen's dying. Hope not. Remember, we had securities accounts. That's bond accounts. And the national debt was sitting in there. Oh, we're all going to die. See? We're all going to die. There's the debt. We're going to die. It's right here in the script. Okay? Well, interest on reserves eliminates the securities accounts. And instead now, the national debt will sit in reserve accounts. So, what do you hear from the, oh my God, the national debt is a crisis, we're all going to die, people? What do you hear from them? Oh, we've just shifted the national debt from securities account to reserve accounts. Why is this a bad thing? I'll tell you why. Because instead of corporations, instead of China, now it's the damn banks. Now the banks, it's transparent, man. Look, they're holding all of the national debt. I knew Chase was in on it. I knew Bank of America was coming to kill us. I knew the banksters were out to get rich. So that's a bad idea. You don't want to hear that, Tat. Even though central banks do pay interest on reserves, they pay support rate. You don't want to hear that, Tat. Okay? So there's got to be a better way. And there is. It's called this. Write it in big letters. ZIRP. ZIRP. Say it with me. ZIRP.
Zero.
Zero interest rate policy. Now, how's that work? Well, once again, recall, if we're going to rely on friggin' monetary policy, we understand that the central bank must have a target rate and defend it. You don't want that target rate going crazy. You don't want the overnight rate going crazy because target rate, throw it out and we'll all die. Central bank will lose control of monetary policy. So we don't need any of that competition for excess reserves. Bonds are a bad idea because national debt people, oh God, we're all going to die. National debt's 20 trillion. China's going to kill us. China's coming for the red check, don't you know? And we're wearing out our arm, cranking out dollars, trying to pay the red check. All right? So you have to hear that. And then bonds are corporate welfare too. Yeah? So you got corporations managing their risk. Yeah. And this ends up, the end result is equity is thrown way out of whack. Right? And then interest on reserves is, might as well just be as bad because now, like we said, the national debt's sitting in reserve accounts, so everybody thinks this is evidence and very transparent that Chase now holds all of our national debt. The banksters are in on it. We're all going to die. Here come the Rothschild. Right? You don't want to hear that crap either. All right. So we've eliminated those two with ZIRP by telling the central bank to maintain a zero interest rate policy. That means that the target interest rate is always set to zero. And guess what? It just so happens that the natural rate of interest is zero. Isn't that wonderful? So banks don't get a tax and they don't get a subsidy. They get dick. It's just zero. The baseline is zero. The target interest rate is zero. Now, what does this mean? This means that if there are excess reserves when government starts deficit spending, keep in mind it'll be deficit spending without bonds because in a zero interest rate policy regime, we don't need to issue bonds anymore. They're not necessary because we'd have no target interest rate to defend. It's zero. Okay? So the reserves can rise to excess. Banks can go crazy. The ones with surplus, lending them off to banks who are deficient. And it will push the overnight rate all the way down to zero. So it won't affect the target rate because the target rate is zero. So you don't need bonds. You don't need to pay interest on reserve. All is well. But now what? Well, now we've got to reclaim something that we've lost in the age of neoliberalism. FRS. Policy. Fiscal policy. I screwed up here because the marker is running out of ink or something. Fiscal policy. The problem that we have today and that we've had for the last 40 years since Milton Friedman came along with his bald head and said, oh my God, we're all going to die from inflation. We got to do something. Monetary policy is awesome. Ever since that point, we have relied on managing our economy with monetary policy. In other words, with bank lending. Okay? And we've pushed aside fiscal policy. Fiscal policy being pushed aside has moved it into a sort of passive role instead of taking its active role. Recall the Democratic Party's platform in 1972. Full employment, a job for everyone who wants a job, a guaranteed job, by the way, for all who want a job and are able to work. And full use of fiscal policy to achieve that goal. Nowadays, it's let's use monetary policy. Okay? Let's use bank lending. All right? And we've allowed fiscal policy to take a passive role because it's dangerous, don't you know? Inflation, don't you know? We're all going to die, don't you know? I'm sorry, but that's the truth. If you look at the end result of every mainstream claim, false claim about money, every mainstream false claim about federal spending, the end result somehow is Armageddon, death, doom, or gloom. All right? It's got to stop at some point because it's bullshit.
Just between friends here, right? I put a post up the other day, and not that a post matters much, but I wanted to spark some interest. And I said, do you believe that the people that peddle lies and myths about monetary policy, about federal spending, about deficits and debt should be put in jail? Should it be criminalized to lie and say horribly stupid things that block us from saving lives? Because if you think about it, it may be by proxy, but the people at the bottom of the food chain, so to speak, the most easily destroyed people, the poor, are directly impacted by these myths and lies. So in my opinion, the people that say these fears of inflation, fears of debt and all that stuff are literally putting a gun to the head of these people and pulling the trigger, even though it's not a physical one. I'm saying literally people that say that stuff are flat out murderers by proxy. People got all up in a bunch about it, but it made them think and it made them talk about it. And in my opinion, you can make a lot of moralizing arguments that, oh, people just don't know any better. And I'm here to say we don't have time to take care of that niceness. We don't have time to stroke them and make them feel better. People are literally dying. What do you think, Ellis? Is that too strong? Did I go too far?
You know, everybody's allowed to say what, you know, they think. I mean, you know, I personally, it's quite obvious that the mainstream mythology is resulting in not only death, but it's resulting in immense suffering and has. And you'll get mainstream economists saying, no, don't confuse neoliberalism with what we're doing here. Okay, no. The truth is that they are actually, by carrying on with their narrative, they're enabling neoliberalism to continue. Okay, when you say things like the federal government, the use of fiscal policy and deficit spending could be inherently inflationary and dangerous, we've got to be careful. You're just making things easier for neoliberalism. When you scream that the Federal Reserve is a private banking entity, you're just enabling neoliberalism. When you scream about stupid things like over in the UK, where they say the government can borrow to deficit spend today, but in 5 years taxes must cover current spending, that's enabling neoliberalism because it's BS. What, you're going to create some employment now and then in 5 years raise taxes and unemploy everybody? What the hell good is that? All right. So what is basically going on is people trapped in this fear, this sphere of fear, and they can't get out. They're like little hamsters. You put them in the little bowl and you shut the lid, so it's a little sphere. And no matter where the hamster runs, it looks like he's going on. The hamster thinks he's going places, but in reality, he's still in that bowl and he's just rolling all over the floor. Okay, that's the mainstream economy. He's just all over the damn place, but he's never leaving the room. He's just going all over the floor. And he thinks he's independent. He thinks but he's not. He's trapped in a bubble of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism has full control over that economy. Okay, it's real simple, and it makes it easier for neoliberalism to enact its agenda. There's no doubt, when you start screaming things about monetizing the debt, which is absolute stupidity, all right? It's when you say things like printing money, the monetizing the debt, printing money, we're all going to die, inflation. You're just enabling these asshats. That's all you're doing. You're enabling these people. You're enabling neoliberalism itself. You're making everybody suffer because you're afraid. And I have spent the majority of, my adulthood from college all the way up to now, still trying to figure out why people adore a narrative that says we cannot do, very dangerous, don't do it, got to be careful, rather than a narrative that says, well, the federal government is the currency issuer, and it can't run out, can't go broke. Deficit spending is not restricted except by the real capacity of the economy to respond without that spending. I don't know why that enrages people so much. It's like, literally, the best analogy I can explain this dilemma or this paradox is this way. It is like a patient going to the doctor and being told you may have terminal cancer. We're going to have to do a biopsy and check. And so they do. And they got to wait 2 or 3 days for the result in your nail biter, You go into the doctor's office. The doctor comes in with the paper and you're really nervous. Oh God, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to die. I don't want to. And the doctor says, good news. Not cancer at all. And the patient goes, what? Fuck you. Why can't I have cancer? You're crazy. You're an asshole. I want to die right now. Right? That's the exact same thing as when someone says, well, we can't do it. Unemployment, what can we do about unemployment? What can we do about poverty? What can we do about income inequality? What can we do about universal health? We can't do anything. And you come in, MMT comes in and says, no, look, here's the truth. And then they get pissed off. I want to die. I want poverty. Why are you telling me we can get out of it? It's the same, it's crazy. It's just nuts. And sometimes I think it's because it's just so simple that people can't handle it. They just can't.
I've come to the belief that people, and you've said this before, so I'm not saying anything you don't agree with, but I've come to the belief that people just enjoy the struggle. They don't really want the solutions.
There are some people
would deprive them of their life's meaning. Their whole meaning for life is the struggle. It has nothing to do with leading a fullness of life where things are actually running smoothly and people are actually not miserable. That's the only thing I can think of. Literally.
There are people out there who actually want solutions, and they go out and they seek them, and they fight for them and they get them, and then they're happy when they get them. And then there's these progressives, if you want to call them that get really angry at the idea that you can do universal health care tomorrow, or you can get a job guarantee in place and fully functioning in 12 months. Or you can do it, switch to green energy today and sustainable output. We can fix the infrastructure and modernize it right now. They get really angry because they don't have nothing to protest. They like to protest because, I guess, they're so addicted to politics, right? That the hobby has become like a way of life for them, And if they can't have the protest, if there's nothing to protest, then what do? Oh, well, we can enjoy universal health care, and you can get a job that pays a decent wage, and you don't have to work in the private sector. Yeah? I don't want that. Protest. Little red cookbook. Damn it. So I get the feeling that sometimes these liberals and some of these progressives would just prefer the struggle. They'd prefer to permanently spend their lives until they're old and in nursing homes with the fist in the air and do nothing but that. That's it. Resist. Fight the man. You got to fight the man, even in the toilet, man. Would you rather solve the problem?
I mean, there is this, what we're talking about, even just macroeconomic truth requires a fist in the air alone, but it leads to a frickin' solution.
Yeah.
It doesn't lead to some wilderness where nobody has anything to say other than, yeah, let's burn it down, man. Let's get everything. Let's take it all down. Get rid of it. It's like, guys, it's pretty simple. Here's how we do it. nah, screw it, man. We got to get rid of it. We got to burn it down, fist in the air. And that to me has driven me nuts. I talked to Nick Branya about it the other day. He's like, oh my God, Steve, our movement is full of people that when you present an opportunity, a real solution where we can actually make a difference, they would rather sit there and follow these alternative pundits that are just flailing about on the camera that have absolutely no solutions whatsoever. But damn it, if they're not fanning the flames of anger, yeah, anger, yes, yes, yes. I personally, I'm at this point where I just want to see my kids have a better life. I don't want to be angry anymore. My heart can barely take the anger I have for the people refusing to learn basic economics.
Yeah, you know how people are like career dog walkers. You know, they actually start a business and they make their life's career out of just walking other people's dogs. You know what I mean? These are the same thing. These are career protesters. You see that? They may not get paid for it or whatnot, but they've made a career. They've made a way of life out of it. You know, what's the protest now? Oh, well, we got to protest the Keystone Pipeline. All right, protest, man. Oh, wait, what? Misogyny in Miami. Oh, I'll be down in Miami protesting. Yeah. Oh, what about the struggle? I'm protesting. What about the Confederate protest, man? Take it down. Protest. There's, you know, wherever there's a protest, I'm there, man. You know, and they spend their whole lives protest. Yeah, as a career protester, man. Because I don't know. I guess they see it as an adventure. But you know what I see as an adventure? I see full stomachs, nobody freezing to death in the winter from homelessness. I see everybody, I see no poverty. I see poverty only by religious choice or by choice in general. I see prosperity everywhere as an adventure. You know why? Because once that's in place, we don't have to stay there. We can move forward even faster. We've dealt with poverty. We've dealt with unemployment for good. We've dealt with the healthcare issues. We've dealt with this. What can we do? Let's move forward. Captain Kirk is behind the console of the USS Enterprise for a reason. Let's build a future.
Yep.
Why not building a future? Why is that not interesting?
April 15th came and went. And on April 15th, tons of faux Mick resistance gathered around the country to exactly pussy hat and fist in the air, went out there to protest to see Donald Trump's tax returns. Yeah. Not a damn thing came of it. Nothing's going to come of it. But instead of protesting economic justice for the 99%, instead of actually protesting for a federal job guarantee or single-payer health care or any of the other things, green energy today, you name it, these turds went out there fighting to see Donald Trump's tax returns. And you know what I did? I looked at my son, my 19-month-old son, and I said, God, I hope I'm successful because the world is against us having nice things. Our own movement would rather us struggle than actually be successful. And that was very depressing.
It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing because the energy wasted and the time wasted following the dictates of someone like Rachel Maddow, who makes millions of dollars. We need to see Trump's tax return. What if I saw him tomorrow? What if we saw everything tomorrow? How would that create full employment? How will that end starvation and hunger? How will that house everybody who's homeless? How will that end all suffering and poverty and bring about prosperity? It won't. You just wasted a bunch of energy. You could have spent that energy there saying, job guarantee now. We demand a job guarantee. We demand Trump give us a job guarantee. You could have even done it with universal health care, free college. I don't give a shit, but at least the energy and time spent would not have been wasted. This is stupid.
Yep.
It's just dumb. Hey, what are you going to find out? A rich guy didn't pay the tax that he should have been paying. Gee, go figure. I would have never guessed in a million years a rich man didn't pay his taxes. You're sitting here spending this entire fucking movement complaining that the rich don't pay their taxes, but you're saying there's a potential that Trump was the first rich man to pay proper taxes. But maybe he didn't. It's a scandal. Let's see it.
Well,
it's obvious.
They also want to know. They want to know his entanglements. They think that the rich guy who's a bloviating fool might be corrupt. So they want to go ahead and push for this stuff. Anyway, But the point is, this comes back to our discussion, though, is that here we are once again. We have a movement. We have choices. We're at like this road less traveled kind of thing, the fork in the road. Do you just want to be a noisy cacophony full of angry, starving, unemployed people, stinky from lack of showers, you name it? Or do you actually want to have lives that your children don't have to worry about food insecurity, that they don't have to worry about sitting there wondering if their electric's paid, that they can actually go ahead and ensure that the man can't offer destitution in response to their desire to get rid of you. Instead, you can tell them, I'm going to go ahead and go on the federal job guarantee. Thank you, sir. And know full well that full cities of people that are destroyed, like in Flint, Michigan, can walk the hell out anytime they want and say, fix the pipes and we may come back. But in the meantime, we're going somewhere else because we can, because we now have mobility. But no, they want to see Trump's tax returns. That is the level of stupid that we're suffering from. And my kids, I look at them and again, I say, guys, this is it. This is what we're facing, son. I apologize from the bottom of my heart that there are ridiculously low information people that flock to that but refuse to fight for actual solutions. It's shameful. It's shameful.
Yeah, we could spend, I don't know, we could spend every Sunday doing lectures on MMT all the way up to advanced topics in macroeconomics and talking about what a current transactions matrix is. But one thing I've got, when you got people like that, we're going to end up educating several people. Okay, but what I mean is you're going to have these people. They're just going to keep going and going until there's a momentum. When it reaches a critical threshold, these people will either be forced along in the avalanche, or they're going to get steamrolled. They're going to have to just come along with the momentum, or they're going to get steamrolled. They got a choice. Like I said, I think it was the last show that we had. Universal healthcare is coming, whether you're trying to protest the tax returns or not. I just don't care. It's coming. Job guarantee is coming. Free college is coming. Infrastructure modernization, green energy, sustainable output's coming. Okay? You can either be part of the solution or you're going to get steamrolled as part of the problem when the momentum reaches a critical threshold. So I think it would be best to just learn this stuff. And if you don't want to learn it from me, there's a bunch of other people out there right now. Okay? But do yourself a favor. Do your homework. All right? Knock off all this tat. It's not that hard to understand. And I'm sorry if you lose a fist in the air over healthcare because we have single payer now. Damn. If you have high speed rail and you have green energy and we've got climate change, we're working on that. Okay. If we've got all this going and we've got full employment and stuff and poverty's been eliminated, I'm sorry you can't get your fist in the air. Believe me, if there's enough evil in the world, you'll always be able to put your fist in the air for something. Okay? But don't perpetuate the evil just because you want to have some meaning in your life. Be part of a solution. And then when evil comes along, fight back. Put the fist in the air down. And actually, don't just put the fist in the air like this. Okay? I don't like that. Right? Put the fist in the air. Be a damn social. Get it up there like this. Roll up the damn sleeve and punch evil's teeth down his throat. Yeah, bam. Don't just sit there and go, do something with that. All right? But wait till evil comes. In the meantime, be part of the solution. All right? So we were at fiscal policy. The thing that we need to reclaim to realize the solution. 40 years ago or so, we were told we got to shift to monetary policy. Okay, we got to worry about this because of inflation. We'll have the central bank deal with full employment and price stability. Price stability is word for keeping inflation down. And so it chooses an inflation rate, target inflation rate. It's 2%. Okay, the 2% rule is just could be 1%, could be 3%. They've chosen 2%, so that's what they want. That's their ideal thing. And they've allowed fiscal policy to become passive. In other words, it has a passive use in the economy. It's not used to its full potential to maintain full employment and to realize the public purpose, this is really the only tool in the government's arsenal that can do that. Okay, it's gone to monetary policy and all this inflation targeting because of Nauru. We talked about that a while back, the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, because there's a certain natural rate of unemployment. There's a certain number. I don't know what it is, but there is a certain number, trust me. And if the government tries to use fiscal policy to deficit spend, right, and push the unemployment rate below that number, then accelerating inflation is the result, and we're all going to die. So we can't do that. Can't do that. Okay. So naturally, got to shun fiscal policy. Very dangerous. Very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. Okay. We'll stick with the monetary policy and let the central bank do this. Okay, this is part of where the central bank conspiracy theorists start to rise up. Okay, because we rely too much on monetary policy, not enough on fiscal policy. All right, so they think, well, you know, obviously the Fed's in charge. It's not in charge at all. It's just in charge of monetary policy. That's it. Right? It's in charge of setting the price of bank lending. Yay. It's also in charge of quantitative easing, you know, atypical monetary policy. You say, oh, well, quantitative easing made Wall Street rich. And what it did was, it's an asset swap for liquidity. Okay, and that reminds me, before I continue, remember we were talking about earlier, just a few minutes ago, about bonds and their use in the economy. Well, the proof that bonds are issued to conduct monetary policy, not fiscal policy, lies in QE, believe it or not. I'll show you how that works really quick. I'll write it on the board. Here's the truth. The truth is that when the central bank does QE operations, the first thing that it has to do is set the target rate at or near zero. The reason why is because it's going to be building up excess reserves in the system. What happens when excess reserves build in the system? Banks who are short are going to go to the interbank market to seek those excess reserves, and banks who have a surplus are going to want to lend them to other banks, and the competition is going to drive the overnight rate down. And if it's not at or near zero, the central bank will just have to drain away all those excess reserves it created from QE, which would make it a pointless act. That's the proof that bonds are issued to conduct monetary policy. End of story. Okay. But we have to reclaim fiscal policy, and the reason why is because in the age of neoliberalism, the shift to monetary policy and away from fiscal policy, shunning it, has done great damage to democracy, which was the intent. That's the intent. It's the intent to damage democracy. Yeah, let me explain to you this way. This will appeal to some of those Fed is private people and the Fed conspiracy theorists. This will really appeal to them. The neoliberal idea of shifting from monetary policy and shunning fiscal policy, look at it this way. Who conducts fiscal policy? Well, that would be Treasury. At whose authority? Congress. Okay, so do the people get to vote for Congress? The people who create the dollar and then spend it into existence? Yes, they do. But when it comes to monetary policy controlling the economy, how many of us vote for the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, or the Board of BOE, or the RBA? We don't. So we don't get a say. And if the economy is being managed by monetary policy, by an unelected committee or an elected board, guess what? Oh well, shove it up your ass. It's a danger to democracy, not because the central bank is independent is going to kill us. That's not what's the danger. The danger to democracy is a failure to use fiscal policy and our reliance on monetary policy, which is nothing more than a blunt instrument that doesn't do anything, really. Doesn't do anything. It can't achieve full employment. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. All right, so what you'll see in MMT literature and from a lot of activists, a lot of advocates, excuse me, I'll sit down a second. What you'll see is this call for a merger of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, or the BOE and Treasury, RBA and Treasury. And yeah, you get rid of the independence myth once and for all. And they say, oh, it's a private bank. You get rid of all that nonsense. You get all that tech. And then you get a reliance on fiscal policy. You begin using fiscal policy again and spend for full employment and public purpose. And you maintain a 0% interest rate target. And there you go. You're on your way to better days. Just that simple. Okay? But you don't have to merge the Fed and the Treasury to achieve that. This helps. It just helps with all the nonsense, you know. But in truth, we can see that Treasury issues bonds to help the central bank conduct monetary policy, and the central bank helps Treasury conduct fiscal policy by ensuring that payments clear. Okay? So hence, they work in tandem, they work together, they cooperate, they are consolidated. The central bank is not independent. Yeah? The Treasury is not bowing down and worshipping at the central bank's needs or the Rothschilds. This is a what we call the consolidated federal government. Okay, and so combining them into one underneath the banner of the Treasury would just confirm that cooperation once and for all, and that would be the end of it. Okay. I think that's about it for the central banking operations, like the fundamentals there. But then the private debt thing is really about, and that only take me a minute ago. When in the age of neoliberalism, we've heard a lot about federal deficit reduction. We wonder why all the deficit reduction when we've seen from sectoral balances that the deficit is necessary, you know, for the government to add net financial assets so that we can keep going because of the imports and the taxes and all that stuff. We got to do something. All right. Well, here's why. The banks and, you know, all the lobbyists and whatnot, they go to government and they ask for, you know, you're going to have this deficit reduction. You even got these stupid ratings agencies. We will downgrade the government's credit rating if it doesn't get its financial house in order. Yeah, that's stupid shit. All of this is designed to promote deficit reduction. You know, we've talked about this before, but why would you want to reduce the deficit? It's real simple. Because there's a thing called a bank IOU. There's bank credit. Credit money, all right? And when banks lend, they don't lend reserves. It's, you know, it's not possible. Banks can't lend reserves, okay? There's no such thing as fractional reserve banking, okay? Banks operate on a thing called credit creation model. And what that means is banks create an IOU, okay? Like a Chase buck, Bank of America buck. But then they denominate it in the government's unit of account. And if you remember from part one, the unit of account in the US is the dollar symbol. So the bank simply takes its number and attaches the dollar symbol to it. There you go. Now you have a bank loan. The only problem here is it's not a net financial asset. It's a horizontal transaction. It's debt. That's exactly what it is. Debt. The bank is creating private debt every time it lends. Okay? So when it lends you $1,000, it's not lending you $1,000. What it's doing is it's lending you 1,000 bank IOUs that are denominated in the government's unit of account. And the reason why they need to denominate them in the government's unit of account is because that makes them acceptable to clear tax liabilities to the federal government. So, remember, the tax is what drives the dollar. Federal taxes drive the currency. This allows the bank's IOU to be acceptable. You can buy things with it. You can do stuff with it. So, people take their credit cards and they go buy stuff, right? And they go get bank loans and they buy stuff. And guess what? They get to go home with this stuff, but they got to pay it back. When the federal government gives you some money, when the federal government deficit spends and gives you $10,000, you don't have to give that $10,000 back unless the government's made a mistake. Okay? But when you go into a bank and you get a loan or you get a credit card for $10,000 and you swipe it for the whole thing, you got to pay that back. Okay? So it's private debt. All right. Now, what we understand from what I just said is that a bank IOU will behave exactly like a dollar. What does that mean? Again, it means you can buy things with it. Yeah? People will accept the bank's IOU because it behaves, looks like, acts like, smells like a dollar. Except it's not. Okay? What does this mean then if the government is reducing the deficit? If the savings desire of the people are here, and the actual level of available dollars from government deficit spending is here, there's a gap. There's a spending gap between what the private sector needs to survive and what the level of actual dollars are available. Now, if you say no, government will control its spending. Let's encourage bank lending instead. Remember, Obama, I've said this 3 times in this program already, about Obama, in various different times in this program, Sunday night. In 2009, Obama said, people ask, where's our bailout? Government money should be going to the people. Well, the truth is a dollar capital in bank is worth $8 to $10 in loan equals a faster pace of economic growth. Okay. In other words, what he was saying, American consumers using credit cards and getting loans is better than us giving you dollars. Going into debt's much better. It's a better idea. Why? Because if this gap, okay, the spending gap, is not filled with dollars by federal deficit spending, but filled by private debt, consumers can keep spending, yeah? They keep buying things, and jobs can be, added. Everyone can just let the economy go on. Everything's wonderful. But the level of private debt begins to escalate. So the further you reduce the deficit, the higher private debt rises. So, once again, the lower you reduce the federal deficit, the higher private debt rises. Okay? Until it reaches a point where consumers simply cannot take on any more private debt. They just cannot afford another credit card. They're already in debt. They already owe on the credit cards. They've got student loans. They've got all sorts of shit. Loans everywhere. They just can't do it. They're maxed out. And they don't have the money to pay that back. They can't keep spending anymore. They contract their spending. That's what happens. When consumers don't have any more, they contract their spending. Okay. Consumer spending collapses. When that happens, business income falls, as well as production demands on business. In other words, Apple just can't make any more iPhones because nobody wants them. The demand is dropping. It's pointless. But how many workers does Apple have? Well, at one time, the economy was booming because we had all that private debt going on. Jobs were being created and everything. Well, now it has excess workers, and it's facing a fall in income and a fall in production demand. What's it going to do? Keep the excess workers? No, it's going to shed them. It's going to fire them, lay them off. And guess what they're going to do? They're going to have to apply for SNAP and unemployment insurance. The automatic stabilizers will kick in and the deficit will automatically start rising. But here's the thing. Now you're in a recession. And not only are you in a recession, and not only is the deficit automatically rising, but in a very, very pithy way. People are still stuck owing this debt. They got paid off. People go bankrupt. People lose their homes. People are impoverished. People end up working 4 jobs, low-wage underemployment jobs. And they don't go anywhere. And this debt is just hanging around their neck. And then the process starts all over again. Credit becomes easier terms. Maybe the deficit's risen enough to where some jobs, money's flowing through. People are a little bit of relief here. And then they start the private debt process over again. In other words, what I'm telling you is that banks profit off of deficit reduction because the product they create acts and behaves like a dollar. And so if the government is reducing the deficit, they can increase their profits by increasing their loans and increasing the credit cards they offer that help you buy food, clothes, and all the things you need. Hell, you can even pay bills with your credit card. Right. So, private debt is a monster. And it's a result of when government's reducing the deficit, it gives Wall Street and other banks an opportunity to make extra profit. So they lobby Congress. They lobby Parliament. Keep the deficit down. Keep it down. Don't get the deficit down. Get the spending down. So they have room to make more and more profit. It's real simple, really. And what they're doing is, the Congress is allowing this And parliaments are allowing this because they know that the bank IOUs from the credit cards and loans will sell production. This is exactly how you can keep wages low and suppressed. This is exactly how you can maintain low-wage underemployment environments, by allowing private debt to accelerate. By giving these people who don't make enough money to begin with a bunch of credit cards and loans, they can keep on spending. Yeah, economy keep going. And then you get a recession, oh well, start over, reboot, America 2.0, America 3.0, America 4.0. It just keeps going. Okay.
Ellis, he made a great point, and I think you'll agree with this. When Bernie Sanders went out there and said, the system's rigged, and everybody said, yeah, the system's rigged. Let's soak Wall Street. Let's do this. Let's do that. Mm-hmm. The idea here you just laid out is that when we reduce deficits, when we reduce spending, we're actually fulfilling the desires of Wall Street because they, banks, et cetera, because they make money off of getting us deep in debt. And when we increase the deficit and so forth, instead, they've made us fearful of a monetarily sovereign nation being in debt. This is the most, in my opinion, this is so lethal, so unscrupulous, so treasonous. Yeah. And this is the essence of neoliberalism. And the people that claim to be fighting neoliberalism, these Justice Democrats and all these other groups, we're going to fight neoliberalism. They're espousing the exact same econ illiterati, but they're fighting neoliberalism.
No. Yeah.
It's just unfathomable. And then I'm not lying. One of the people on my team quit the other day, literally quit, Real Progressives, because she said, I think you're going to be on the wrong side of history with this one. And I'm like, you've been with us for this long and you don't understand the economics behind it? No, we're going to be the ones sitting there sadly going, we told you so. And people are literally sitting there lining up behind the next wave of progressives that haven't learned anything about economics, that are still parroting the same worthless stuff. And we're going to get it again. And the worst thing is our movement has this pathetic sense of protecting its politicians. So they're going to tell us we can't. Don't bash Tulsi. That's the next thing you're going to start hearing. Don't you bash her. Don't bash her. And so we're going to be stuck with the exact scenario you just proved point blank. Why is it that she'll not know her? Or why is it any of them won't know it? Because we don't force them to know it. And anyway, I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, it's for those of people who just simply cannot understand this private debt thing. It's real simple. If the government is not spending, remember, consumers have to spend. Consumers have to spend, and the reason why is because they need things to survive. They need things to get by. But guess what? They also have to spend so that people can keep their jobs. They have to increase the spending so more jobs will be added, because workers depend on consumer spending. And if there's not enough dollars in the economy, you got to make it up from somewhere. If government is not going to give it to you, the only choice you have is bank loans. The only choice you have is private debt escalation.
Let me just say something real quick. I'm so sorry to say this, but we've had Jordan Chariton on this program, who represents a sympathetic ear to the Justice Democrats, and every one of them that I've heard, not one of them understand the truth of modern monetary theory. Not one of them, literally, not a frickin' one of them. And they're all out there saying the same stuff. And they're like, well, we got to pay for it. We got to get tax money to pay for things over here. And we got to fight this tax war to make money over here to pay for things. And I just want to say, I have seen this every step along the way. Even the new parties starting up don't know any better. And that this should terrify the living shit out of everybody that claims to be a progressive, wants a progressive New Deal. But every single vehicle that's going for it is economically illiterate. And that includes jank. Oh yeah, we'll do some deficit reduction, but we'll do some deficit spending, but we got to find some tax money somewhere to pay for things. And that's the truth of the matter. That's our movement right there, friends. And that's what we're stuck with until we change them, until we force them to address it. They just, that's just your pet economic thingy. That's the
No,
kind of garbage you get from these people. No
no,
joke.
it's currency analysis. It's not a pet theory. It's not even a theory.
Yep.
It's just currency analysis. It's a fact. It doesn't matter whether you believe in it or not. Whether you believe in it or not doesn't change the reality of it. What I just told you about private debt is that's it. End of story. Okay. Deficit spending is the only way a currency issuing sovereign government can introduce currency into its economy. Okay. And if it's not doing that and leaving it there for people to use, then consumers won't be able to spend and workers won't be able to keep their jobs because workers are hired based on consumer demand for goods and services. If that demand increases consistently, business will have to ask for more help from labor and more and more jobs will be added. Okay? So government controls the unemployment rate. The sovereign currency issuing government controls the unemployment rate 100%. Okay? And it is the only entity that can eliminate unemployment, which it does through deficit spending. Okay? Private debt is just a substitute. Private debt is an alternative to the government's dollar or the government's pound. Okay? And if you don't understand that, I can explain it this way. Pretend that the federal government is the only source of water. It supplies the private sector with all the water. And guess what? One day it decides we're just not going to deficit spend any more water. And so people start getting thirsty. And then the banks come along with a special product called Pepsi. They create a product called Pepsi, you see. And they say, here, drink this. It'll be all right. And for a while, it quenches the thirst. So, government's not deficit spending water into the economy. That's fine. We don't need it. We got the Pepsi. They keep drinking the Pepsi. Over about a few years later down the road, population starts to get sick. That's private debt. It's just like Pepsi to water. Water is the only thing that will guarantee your survival. Pepsi is just an alternative to the water, but eventually it'll make you sick. Dollars are the only currency that we can use in the United States to get by. Okay? And they come from the federal government. And the only way to add more dollars is through deficit spending. If you reduce the deficit for anyone to survive, to have enough money, you've got to replace that with something. You go to the banks, you get bank credit money, an IOU denominated in the government's unit of account, so that it will behave like a dollar. It'll buy things, and it becomes an alternative to federal deficit spending. Private debt expansion is an alternative to federal deficit spending. But private debt expansion cannot go on forever with federal deficits in absentia. And what's going to happen, consumers will slow their spending and finally it will collapse. Business will lose income. They will begin to shed jobs because production demand is low. Unemployment will rise and a recession will occur. If an economist ever tells you we don't know what causes recession, he's lying or he's an idiot. End of story.
So let's take 2 seconds here because we're kind of getting late here. It's 9:45.
Okay. Yeah.
But I want to say this. You know, I'm not smearing the Justice Dems. Mm-hmm. I'm not smearing the Greens. Mm-hmm. I'm not smearing anyone. Mm-hmm. Flat out, if you think taxes pay for spending, you're either one of two things. It's simple. It really is simple. Either A, you don't understand federal financing, mm-hmm. or B, you're a liar. That's not a smear. That's true. We've just laid it out. Taxes do not fund federal spending. So, that said, when people say, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? At the end of the day, Congress is going to appropriate the money. That's how we're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
Period.
How I'm going to pay for it is this. You come to me if you're Green or you're a Justice Democrat and you say, Ellis, how are you going to pay for the job guarantee? Tell me right now. What I'm going to tell you is, well, I will go to the one who issues the currency and have him pay for it. Why not? The dollar comes from somewhere. You can't just sit there and believe a fairy tale for the rest of your life that dollars just materialize mysteriously in the private sector. Okay? You can't do this because it's stupid. There's no real source of dollars. They're supernatural objects that just appear like specters. It's just stupid. There has to be a source of the US dollar, and there is. Constitution, US Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. Government, the US government alone issues the US dollar. The British government, the UK government issues the pound sterling. The Australian government issues the Australian dollar. It is the only issuer. It issues that it will because it's a free-floating inconvertible fiat currency, see Part 1. Okay? And when a nation is importing more than it's exporting, the federal government must run continuous deficits to ensure that the net savings desires of the private sector are met. Otherwise, you'll have a recession. It's that simple. That's currency analysis. That's reality. It's macroeconomic reality. So how am I going to pay for it? I will ask Congress to authorize the spending.
That's right. And you know, and Alice, one final thing from my perspective, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut us off here.
Cool.
You know, the reason why we do these shows, and the reason, I mean, otherwise, if everybody already knew this stuff, we wouldn't even have single payer. We would have complete and utter universal health care as a right. You wouldn't even have a transaction probably. You might in the back end, but you wouldn't experience it. You would just walk in, get your leg fixed, get your surgery, whatever. But the problem is, unfortunately, what we've got is a system here where people believe we have to find money to pay for things. Well, we got to cut spending here so that we can find spending there. God, you know, and if people understood this, that it's not true, that is literally not true, that taxes for revenue are obsolete. Beardsley Rummel wrote this back in 1946, and it was probably true even before that.
Yeah, it's an article in January of 1946.
Bingo. I mean, we're talking about every step along the way this has been documented. And yet they still parrot the same lies. And those same lies, when you go outside of our progressive bubble, and you go into a room with Republicans over here and LOL Libertarians over there, and vote blue sycophants right here, and Greens and progressives and everybody else all in the same room, and you're trying to put this through, and they're like, well, how are you going to pay for it? Hillary Clinton destroyed Bernie Sanders with the simple question of how are you going to pay for it, made him look like he was a fool pie in the sky, or I'm going to tax Wall Street, I'm going to do this. Populism loved it, but it had nothing to do with reality. And so we're trying to say we love our families, we love our children too much to allow the charade to continue. And that's it. If the Justice Dems knew that, man, we would be set, man, because it would be all over the news. TYT would be talking about it constantly. They would be debunking this truth. But they don't do that. Why is it? Because they don't know. They don't know, or they don't care, or they're part of the problem of perpetuating this lie. You take your pick. They're not talking about it.
Yeah.
And that's the deal.
Yeah, it's, you know, Hillary Clinton, the best solution for Bernie Sanders, when Hillary asked him that, what he should have said was, well, you should know, you were a senator. We'll have Congress authorize the spending. It starts in the House. Senate approves it. We'll send it to the president for signature. You should know, Senator Clinton. That's what he should have said. You know why? Because it will put the onus on Hillary to lie directly to the American people and say, you don't pay for universal health care when Congress authorizes the spending. If she'd have said that, she would have been a fucking liar in front of the entire nation. You would have trapped her. But no, I said, well, I'm going to tax Wall Street. We're going to do the Robin Hood tax. Well, you know, okay. But that's not how you're going to pay for it. What you're going to do is you're going to create better equity. So, you know, let me say this. Yeah, we're going to tax the rich. And we're going to tax the rich, the opulent rich at a heavy price. Very high. But we're not going to tax them to pay for things. We're not going to tax them to pay for things. We're going to tax them for better equity because it's necessary for equity. Okay? It's necessary for equity. It is not necessary to pay for things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and get busy doing great things right now. And I will tax the rich as soon as I can get the American people behind me so that the rich have no defensive measures left, and then I can get at them. But even then, it won't pay for it. I'll just destroy their money. Or they can have an out. You can invest billions if you want, millions, billions, whatever, how bigger your fortune is. Doesn't matter. You can invest it in productive investment in the economy so that workers can have it. And then, you get a lower tax rate. But other than that, if you don't want, I'll just destroy your wealth right now. I will tax it and destroy it, because that's what federal taxes do. They destroy dollars. End of story. There's no way around that, because we live in a free-floating fiat, inconvertible fiat currency arrangement. That's just it. End of story. All right? It's no gold standard. So I'm not taxing the rich to pay for anything, and I'm going to make it clear one last time before I get off here. MMT does not say the rich should not be taxed. It does not say the rich should be taxed. MMT is just currency analysis. It just describes what is. People who happen to be progressive and advocate MMT or teach MMT will tell you, we're not going to tax the rich to fund things. But they will tell you, yes, we will tax the rich. So I make myself very clear. Anyone who says, MMT says we should not tax the rich at all, is putting up a straw man argument. That's it. Because it's not true. It's another lie. Any progressive MMT person I've ever spoke to always says, yeah, we should tax the rich. For equity's sake. Okay? Understand that. We do not, when someone says, we don't tax the rich to pay for things, that does not imply in any way, shape, or form that we say don't tax the rich. It just means the money that we take from them will not fund whatever programs we're trying to fund, because the spending must come first to fund it. End of story. So it's a straw man argument. End of story. That's it.
Very good. All right, Ellis. Thank you so much for your time again, sir.
Yeah.
And with that, I guess I'll just go ahead and say thank you, everybody, for joining us. This was a full 2 hours of Ellis tonight, and it was an awesome experience for me. Hopefully you guys share this around, because we do these things not just so that the people that are watching live can see it, but so that you guys go out on YouTube and share the stuff. You go back and you share the live streams wherever you can. It's so important to get these people to understand that we can demand better today. We don't have to wait till Trump's out of office. We don't have to wait till the next progressive gets in office and then starts lying and saying taxes fund spending. We don't have to do any of that. We can start telling the truth, put an inflationary constraint in our budgeting instead of a budgetary constraint. We can start doing things that make sense. But it takes all of you to share these videos to help us get the word out.
Yeah.
So with that,
before we get about an inflation thing, when we switched to fiscal policy from monetary policy, we stopped controlling inflation, trying to control inflation by using the Federal Reserve or the central bank. You know how we do it? When fiscal policy is in charge, we do it with a job guarantee. That's how we do it. We control inflation with a job guarantee. Perfect. That's how we're going to do it. And that's all there is to it.
All right, sir. With that, everybody, Stewie says you suck, but trust me, you don't. Thank you for hanging with us the whole night. With that, Mr. Ellis, I've got a meeting here in 5 minutes.
Yep.
Sure, I will talk to you later. Everyone else, have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Real Progressives.
Ciao.